Hey, what's up everyone? Bloodstained Curse of the Moon has recently released and offers a handful of characters to play. Despite being a very simple game, there are a lot of tiny intricacies that can change how you play, as well as having a lot of hidden secrets. For this video, I'll be covering exclusively all the characters and their abilities and sub-weapons. Maybe you'll learn something new, or something that can help you in your playthroughs. Although if you've read the character breakdown on Curse of the Moon's main site, you'll know about 95% of what's in this video. However, I'll be talking a bit about damage, which is an important topic when discussing a character's abilities, which isn't covered on the main site. Obviously, there's no way to know how much real damage you do since you can't see the enemy stats and you don't have a visual number displaying the damage. I would like to thank CptBrian from speedrun.com who has spent the time to figure out everything. He created a guide detailing the damage caused by each attack and enemy's health, which is incredibly tedious work. So check him out if you're curious, link below. So with the introduction done, let's get started. The first character I'll cover is Alfred the Alchemist. This guy is my least favorite character, but offers the best utility anyone has to offer with his sub-weapons. His normal attack is a staff swing. It does 3 damage and there are no instances where it would be beneficial to use. This is the worst normal attack out of the cast due to it being the weakest damaging normal attack. It's extremely short range and long attack animation, though it does cover a tiny bit of space above him. He also has the lowest starting health of the cast, sitting at 6 HP, so he dies very easily. He makes up for all this by having the most useful sub-weapons in the game. His default sub-weapon is Burning Sphere, which surrounds your character with multiple balls of fire for a short time, costs 5 weapon points, and will remain active when switching characters. Anything hit by this will be dealt 1 damage. The skill is very useful for safe platforming, preventing knockbacks done by projectiles, and weak enemies such as frogs or Medusa heads. This skill will also protect you from the rubble obstacles on the last stage, allowing you to take shortcuts in addition to protecting you from the boss's rubble attack. Next up we have Frost Caliber, which costs 4 weapon points to use. This skill will freeze anything it touches for a brief period of time, even lanterns and enemy projectiles. Anything that is frozen will be shattered by an attack and die with the exception of bosses, who will instead take twice the amount of damage. The painting sub-bosses still get shattered though. Frozen objects including enemies can be walked on, leading to easier paths through a level. This skill does not do any damage, but looking at its utility, it really doesn't need to. Coming up next is the Voltic Ray, which can only be obtained from green lanterns and costs 4 weapon points. This skill is amazing at killing slow enemies or stationary targets. You can send out 3 at a time and it will home onto an enemy, striking them 5 times, dealing 3 damage each time. And last and certainly the least useful skill in the entire game is Soul Vision, which creates a duplicate of Alfred a couple pixels away at the cost of 3 weapon points. This just artificially increases your basic attack range and allows you to hit an enemy twice if it's large enough. Overall, just a really bad skill with no uses, so try not to pick it up if you know the lantern is going to drop it. Our next character is Gebel, one of the 2 shard binders in Curse of the Moon. This guy looks like an Alucard inspired character and has a few unique mechanics. Unlike the other 3 characters, Gebel only has 1 sub-weapon, and that is Immortal Metamorphosis, or in other words, his bat form, which costs 1 weapon point to use. Because of this, anytime he breaks a purple lantern, he gets a large potion instead. This becomes very useful on certain runs when you're using very expensive sub-weapons and not sparing any weapon points. Gebel has the second lowest health, sitting at 8. While Gebel is in bat form, 2 weapon points will be consumed per second. While in his bat form, he can perform Siphon Blood and Quick Ascend, which both consume 2 weapon points. Siphon Blood causes Gebel to dash forward a short distance. Gebel will be invincible while the skill is active and damage any enemies in his path, dealing 5 damage, and can also proc 2 hits. This allows you to quickly get through levels by avoiding enemies, so long as you have the required weapon points. Gebel's normal attack shoots out 3 bats at roughly 0, 45, and 90 degree angles. He deals the most damage out of the cast if all 3 bats hit, but his attack animation is not the fastest, so it's not always faster using him to kill big targets. The first bat hits for 3 damage while the next 2 will hit for 1. His normal attack also has trouble hitting low targets, even when crouched, but he can hit high targets almost directly above his head, which makes it very useful for airborne enemies or destroying projectiles. Overall, he's a decent character covering the utilities Alfred doesn't have, very useful for certain bosses, and using a lot of shortcuts. Next, we have our other Shardbinder and protagonist of the main game Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, Miriam. Miriam has 10 health, the second highest in the game, and is a jack of all trades kind of character. She has decent health and a toolkit useful for all situations. She has a higher jump than the rest of the cast, making it much easier to platform correctly, and uses a slide which lets you take shortcuts. Slide has a fast startup but takes too long to recover, so it's not very useful for dodging. That said, it's very useful on the boat and turtle boss fight since it allows you to move during the parts where you have to remain crouched. In Curse of the Moon, Miriam's main weapon is a whip, meaning she has the longest reach in the game outside of Alfred's terrible Soul Vision sub-weapon. The whip does 4 damage, but can hit twice when striking enemies in the air, dealing a total of 8 damage. It'll hit once when rising and once when falling. Miriam also has a variety of useful sub-weapons. Rapier throws 3 daggers at roughly 22, 45, and 67 degree angles at the cost of 3 weapon points. The first dagger deals 3 damage, with each subsequent dagger dealing 2, totaling 7 damage if all 3 daggers land. This subweapon is very useful for dealing with airborne units, extra useful against large slow moving targets since it's more likely that all 3 knives will hit. Her other subweapon is called Sickle, which costs 3 weapon points to use. She throws a sickle across the screen which will boomerang back, dealing 3 damage each time it collides with an enemy. This is useful for those pesky archers and the dragon boss fight, but other than that, the weapon has very little use. My favorite subweapon of hers is the Axe, which costs 6 weapon points and deals 25 damage. This is the strongest subweapon in the game in terms of raw power, and definitely has its uses for destroying tough enemies. The drawbacks are a short range, but it still beats Alfred's normals, and it has a very long startup, so it's easy to be knocked out of the attack animation. But when used correctly, it's very devastating. The second most useless subweapon in the game is Miriam's Dagger. It costs 1 weapon point to use and deals 2 damage. It has long range and can be spammed, but is outclassed by everything else. And lastly, I saved the best for last. We have Zangetsu, the better jack of all trades character. Zangetsu is actually a very special character, even considering the uniqueness of the previous 3. He has a large skill set outside of sub-weapons, which can be fully unlocked in Ultimate mode or by killing the 3 previous characters in normal mode. Zangetsu has the highest health pool at 12 HP and does 4 damage per attack. Like Miriam, Zangetsu can proc his normal attack twice while jumping, but is extremely rare to proc outside of very specific situations. While his horizontal range is about the same as Alfred's, his faster attack animation puts him on the top of the list in terms of DPS. Zangetsu has 3 useful sub-weapons: Ball and Chain, Magic Charm, and Demon Essence. Ball and Chain is a whip attack that hits all objects in a 45 degree angle with a decent range, dealing 7 damage and costing 3 weapon points. This is very useful for solo non-ability Zangetsu runs, as he has a lot of trouble reaching enemies in the air. Magic Charm is a holy potion from Castlevania. Zangetsu throws a charm downward at a 45 degree angle, which will create a magic sphere for a brief period of time, dealing 4 damage per tick and costs 3 weapon points to use. Very useful for enemies that don't move and deal a good amount of damage if you're able to get all the ticks off. Being hit by the charm being thrown will also cause 2 damage. My favorite sub-weapon is Zangetsu's third sub-weapon, Demon Essence. This increases normal attacks, as well as the select few sub-weapons damage by 1, at the cost of 4 weapon points. Obviously a very useful skill for all situations and can be transferred to other characters as well. Now let's talk about what makes Zangetsu stand above his peers. He has 3 abilities that are gained by killing his allies and a hidden ability I'll call Charge Blade. By killing Miriam, Zangetsu obtains the skill Crescent Moon, which changes his air attacks to cover a wider area in front of him. Not only is this useful for hitting enemies below you and some enemies slightly above you, it makes it much safer to jump attack through a level. This attack also double hits more frequently than his normal attack, although it's still harder to perform than Miriam's double attack. The base damage of this skill remains the same as his normal attack though. By killing Alfred, Zangetsu will gain the ability Blood Moon, which is just a fancy name for double jump. Now he can jump higher than Miriam and reach areas normally only she can reach. Since there's no jump correction, double jump will allow you to correct any mistimed jumps to some extent, and will also allow you to fall off edges and jump to safety. This ability lets you reach areas that Zangetsu normally can't get to, such as the tiny area for the gauntlet item. By killing Gebel, Zangetsu gains the new ability New Moon, which is another fancy way of saying he can now run. Running is my favorite skill and is the reason I will always have Zangetsu out. Aside from the obvious increased movement speed, this can be combined with double jump to reach areas that are higher and further away. Then we have his hidden skill, Charge Blade, which is never mentioned in the game, but is hinted at when defeating the final boss as Zolo Zangetsu. I didn't know about this skill until someone on Reddit mentioned coming across it by accident. In order to perform this skill, you have to start the game in ultimate mode, and hold the attack button down. Then you'll see Zangetsu begin charging his attack, similar to how Mega Man charges his X-Buster. Releasing the button will have Zangetsu let out a huge AoE slash attack in front of him, dealing 12 damage. It has a relatively short charge time of 2 seconds, so it's very reasonable to use. I haven't played with this skill much, but just from looking at the range it covers, the amount of damage it deals, and its quick animation, this skill is definitely amazing, especially since it doesn't cost any weapon points. So that's the character breakdown for each character. I hope you guys learned something new and enjoyed watching through the video. As always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time!